So we're going to be talking today about what can we do about factory farming. So if you're in Dustin's talk earlier today, he was talking a lot about why we should care about this issue. He touched a little bit on what we can do, but I'm going to go a little bit more into that sort of second part of this question. So if we assume that we buy some of the arguments that he was making before, okay, what's the next step? What could you actually do about it? And as I just revealed, so this is what most people think the answer is, or many people think the answer is to either to go vegan, to encourage your friends and family to go vegan, or to go be vegetarian or something like this. And really what I want to do is suggest that this is maybe not the best strategy and there are other things we can do. So often when it comes to diet change, it can be really hard to get other people, to encourage other people to change their diets. It can be really hard to change our diets ourselves. We've identified kind of three main reasons for this. One of them, which we call denial, despair, and defiance, the three Ds. So basically, there's this idea called cognitive dissonance and the meat eater's paradox. And this is basically this idea that if we understand that we love animals, we think that animal suffering matters, and then we kind of know, most of us, that the way that our food is produced is not ideal for those animals. This creates this dissonance in our minds. And the easiest way to resolve cognitive dissonance, the way that most people choose to resolve most cognitive dissonances, is to sort of just push this issue and say, this isn't actually a problem, I'm not going to think about it. So when we start talking to people about maybe you should change your diet, maybe you should stop eating animal products, often we're triggering this approach, and this is often quite bad. It causes people to deny there is a problem at all. The other problem is that even if you say, oh well, I guess I could change my diet, but nobody else is going to do it. And so even if I do, it's not actually going to bring about the change that we want to see in the world. So I'm having to forgo my favorite foods and eat tofu all day long or something, and nobody else is going to be doing anything. It's not going to actually achieve anything. So that's strictly wrong in the sense of every product we don't eat slightly reduces demand and things, but it is a profound problem, and that you can see why people kind of resist this. So if we can't do that, there must be other things we can do, and that's what I want to focus on. Is both if you're already a vegan, if you already care about these issues, maybe some ideas about how you could talk to other people you know about these problems, and things you could suggest to your friends who are kind of maybe curious about animal welfare issues and things like that, but also for us in the room today. I think in the church, we have a really powerful opportunity where we're engaged in these quite tight-knit communities of people who really care and engage in ethical issues. And this is a really powerful vehicle for bringing about all sorts of social changes, including changes to the way that we see animals. So for those of you who are already sort of fully bought in, I think thinking about how we can be more strategic advocates for the issues that we care about within our church communities is really important. It's something that I kind of want this talk to also give you some ideas for, as well as maybe for people who want to, who are thinking about this for the first time. So that's why I'll start there. Dustin talked a little bit about this, but the scale of this problem is really, really quite huge. So there are about 80 billion land animals farmed each year, hundreds of billions of fish, trillions of farmed insects. Wherever you kind of draw the ethical line, there's huge numbers of animals that are being farmed every year. This is a cow farm. This problem can feel really overwhelming, and this is one of the core reasons that people often shy away, because you think, even if I care, even if I agree, this is just too big. What can I possibly do about this problem? But I think it's important to remember that factory farming is not a natural disaster. It's not just something that happens to us. It is a product of human society, and therefore a thing that is at least possible to do something about. And particularly, there are kind of two key pieces to this. So factory farming comes about because of technological advancements. Things like we learned about in the 1920s that if you give vitamin supplements to chickens, that you can keep them indoors. And so we built these technologies that allow us to produce animals inside, which is more efficient in the sense of you reduce the number of inputs that you produce. You can produce a lot more food a lot more cheaply. And we also had specific, particularly in America, specific government policies that have made this particular way of farming more efficient. So subsidies for grains, for example, that mean that it's much cheaper to feed. You can buy really, really cheap grains like soy and wheat, and you can feed them to these animals in a barn, and you can produce food way faster, way more cheaply than you would if you were, say, raising them out on a field. You can use a lot less land, these inputs are really cheap. So there are these kind of things that we've done that have brought about the system of industrialized agriculture, and equally we can think about ways that you can use these same mechanisms to evolve the food system to a different future. So we have technologies, for example, and I'll talk about these later, that can give us alternative food sources. So things like cultivated meat and fermented persistent fermentation. We have other government policies. We can change where subsidies go. We can have laws that either require or encourage better welfare practices. There are all these kinds of the same levers that have brought about factory farming give us opportunities to think about how we can kind of tackle this problem and move to an alternative food future, which is both kinder to animals but also to our planet and humans too. And speaking of, some people ask the question, why should I care? What if I don't care about animals? Like, is this at all important to me? This might be a question that you get from other people. Dustin has mainly answered this, but I do think one of the things that we need to just bear in mind is that they are extremely cute. And that shouldn't be forgotten. But also, even if you don't care, even if you don't care about animals, even if that little pig hasn't persuaded you, we should also remember that this is not simply a problem of animal welfare. Factory farming specifically has incredible negative impacts on our planet. It is one of the leading causes of deforestation. We use 50% of the land in the world that's habitable is used for agriculture. 80% of that land produces in some way animal products, whether that's grain that is then fed to animals or whether it's like directly pasture land for animals. And yet it produces just a tiny fraction of the end calories that we eat and of the protein we consume. I think it's roughly a third of our protein, about 17% of our calories comes from animal products. That's 80% of the land that we produce. So if we could reduce our reliance on animal products, we could tackle questions like deforestation, and land use, which leads to global warming. Animal agriculture, is responsible for something in the region of 70% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And it's particularly responsible for things like methane emissions, which are some of the most potent greenhouse gases. They impact the climate much more than CO2, for example. And so this is a real, both actually an opportunity from the climate point of view, but also like a real kind of lever within the climate problem, as well as things like local problems. So if you live near a factory farm, it's very likely that air pollution will give you issues like heart diseases, cancers have been linked to animal agriculture. Often these farms are located in areas where people are poorer. So there are sort of social justice elements around some of the environmental issues here as well. And direct problems for people. So about 3/4 of our antibiotics are fed to animals. We primarily feed them to animals because when you're keeping an animal in this factory farm, in this shed, the diseases spread extremely quickly. So what we do is we feed them the antibiotics before they get any diseases in order to try to reduce the number of animals that are killed that die of diseases before they can be used in the food system. This is a massive driver of antibiotic-resistant diseases, which already kill hundreds of thousands of people every year and are expected by year 2050 to be one of the leading causes of death for humans in the world. So it is, even if you literally do not care about animals, this is actually a real problem that we need to address as a society, because it is very likely to lead to huge amounts of suffering for our fellow humans, particularly in some of the poorest parts of the world. So what can we do? What does work to tackle this? If it's not asking people to go vegan, if it's not necessarily changing our own diets, what can we actually do to help animals? So I think this is a really good place to start. This is Jeff Seabohm, who's a philosopher and law professor at NYU, has this kind of theory of change, which is essentially, this is not specific to the animal space, but this is looking at, okay, if we have this really big problem, and we're unclear exactly how we get from where we are right now to to the solution we want. And I think factory farming fits into this category of problems. It's likely that it will take us more than our lifetimes to fully solve this issue, absent some really significant change like, I don't know, AI solving alternative proteins in a really profound way, very much quicker than we expect. How do we actually impact on this problem? I think this is a really good framework for thinking about it. So the idea is you focus on short-term wins, things we can do right now that we can have measurable impacts on the problem, which creates some progress for some of those affected. So an example of this might be if we can have a welfare intervention which makes the lives of, say, chickens a little bit better, this is a direct win for animals. This produces momentum for the broader problem, and this allows us to move towards our radically transformative goal, as he has here. So short-term wins produce progress and momentum, which ultimately build towards the future that we want to see. I think this is a really good kind of framework for thinking about these problems, because it allows us to say, okay, not like, how do I solve factory farming tomorrow, but how do I build momentum? How do I make the lives of animals better? And how am I building momentum toward the problem that we want to solve? So to get specific about this, I think there are two ways we can do this. One is to reduce suffering, and the other is to provide alternatives. I'm going to talk about a couple of charities that do really good work on reducing suffering first. One is the Humane League. So Dustin mentioned this, the work of this charity, not just Humane League, but at the end of his talk, talking about corporate campaigns. So the Humane League are one of the leading organizations doing cage-free campaigns around the world. It's mainly in the US and the UK. And essentially what they do is they'll go to large companies like McDonald's or catering companies for hotels, for example, and they'll say, we want you to commit to only using cage-free eggs. So you won't refuse to buy any more eggs from caged hens. Many companies, surprisingly, I think, just say yes when they're asked to do this. The threat of some kind of protest or negative publicity is enough for many companies just to get them to commit to transitioning away from cage-free, from cages. And for those that don't, organizations like the Humane League will then do protests outside their facilities. They will do really creative campaigns targeted specifically at the CEO, trying to get them to pay attention and have influence, these kinds of things. McDonald's is a really good example. So they, at the time when they made a commitment to go cage-free, they were using more eggs than the entire than all the cage-free eggs in America. So if they bought every single cage-free egg, they still wouldn't have enough eggs to service their demand. And when they actually committed to go cage-free by this year, and they were successful in doing that 2 years ago. So they not only, they made a massive difference to the demand for cage-free eggs, which likely produced a huge number of farmers to transition away from cages, because that was the only way that McDonald's was going to meet their supply. So this is targeting the buyers of eggs, has a huge knock-on impact then on the supply, because it forces those farmers then to say, okay, if I want to keep McDonald's as my customer, I need to change what I'm doing. And we think that cages contribute between 30 to 60% of the suffering of an egg-laying hen. So this is a massive, massive difference in the lives of these animals. Yeah, and these campaigns have worked on huge companies, as you can see there, and a lot of companies. It's made a real big difference. We're going from something that looks a bit like this, 10% of hens in the US, through to now 48%. So this year, into next year, we're expecting to hit over 50% of animals in the US being cage-free. And in the UK, we're at 50 a decade ago, and we've now got to about 80%, which is unlocking the potential, fingers crossed, for a law to ban cages in the UK in the next few years. And this is only really possible because we are at the point now where the vast majority of hens live outside of cages. So, and this is a pretty good example, admittedly, of what a hen's life might look like, but this is the kind of transformation that we're trying to bring around. Another example of work we could do is on policy, again, relieving animal suffering. So the DVF, the Danish Vegetarian Foundation is the UK translation, are an amazing organization from Denmark. They've really been pioneering political work and lobbying activities, unlocking lots of money for transitions towards more better animal welfare standards, to get farmers to produce more plant proteins and things like this. So really bringing a lot of transformation from policy work. And as I say, when you've got these corporate campaigns unlock this space for then policy people to come in and say, okay, 80% of farmers are already cage-free. Let's bring the other 20% along board now, which is actually much harder to do at the corporate level, because you might have, for example, that last 20% might be a lot of really tiny companies and farms or something like this. So this policy works really well with these kind of more public-facing campaigns in a sort of synergistic way that we can kind of unlock change when they kind of work together. Then, as I said, so we've got these campaigns that are reducing suffering. The other big part of this is providing an alternative. So people need to eat. Most people are not going to stop eating meat or dairy, but what if their meat or dairy came from something other than a factory farmed animal? And this is where organizations like the Good Food Institute come in. So they're working to foster and nurture alternative proteins. So this is cultivated meat, which is essentially where you take cells from an animal and you can grow them without the need for animals. So you grow them in a factory, essentially. No sentient beings involved at all. You can produce food that is biologically exactly the same as meat, but with a fraction of the land use, much less impact on the environment, and of course no animal suffering need be involved at all. Precision fermentation is another similar thing for dairy products. In America, you can even buy precision fermented ice cream, where essentially proteins are, yeasts are used to produce a biologically identical milk product. And this is available for purchase in places like America. They are perfectly safe. They produce exactly the same foods. It's a question really of scaling these products up and building this industry out. And so the Good Food Institute support that work. They support research. They support policy to prevent the existing animal farming companies from trying to put legal barriers in the way of these products. So there are some alternative protein bans in America, despite the fact you can't buy the food. In Florida, it is already banned. And this is as a result of lobbying from vested interests wanting to kind of head off competition before it arrives. And so the Good Food Institute works to try and prevent some of these things, build these industries, help do research on how can we get consumers to want to buy this stuff? How can we solve some of the technical challenges? How can we unlock more government money to support the development of this industry? So they are another incredible and really useful charity in this space. So what could you do to support this stuff? What could your friends do? What could we all do to help with some of these things, whether it's reducing suffering or working on alternatives? I have a couple of two real key kind of categories here. So basically the animal movement is bottlenecked by two really important things. One is talent. So we just don't have enough really good people working. There are some really specific problems that need work, but there's also just some more general categories of things, like there aren't enough people with senior leadership experience, for example, in the animal movement. We need more people who know how to build and lead great organizations. We also need people with really experts in research on particular issues, for example. And the other one is money to pay all these very talented people. We are in a David and Goliath situation, really. So this is my vegan and David and Goliath. You've got a Bible reference in somehow. So the meat industry is worth about $2 trillion, and globally we invest, roughly speaking, $290 million in anti-factory farming campaigns. So if David was like a roughly normal human size, Goliath, the Earth's atmosphere comes up to his belly button. That's the kind of discrepancy in the spending power between these two. Our total amount of money is about what McDonald's makes in profits in a week. And we've got to use this to cover the entirety of the world's factory farming problems, all these different campaigns. Actually, factory farming is growing in places like Asia and Africa, where there are the least protections for animals. So some of the worst practices are actually on the increase, despite all the amazing work that's being done in places like North America and Europe. And so we really, really do need a lot more money. This is just another way of thinking about this. So currently, despite the fact that there are 83 billion farmed land animals, we give just 3% of all the money that goes to animals to these animals. So although I have cats are great, but probably if you're thinking about where to donate, not giving to cats protection, but thinking about giving to the very equally cute pigs is maybe a better idea. My organization works on this problem. So this is a QR code to our website. If you'd like to think about donating, if you use the code Christians for Impact, you get a 100% bonus on your donation. But you can also check out what we do is we try and find charities that are doing particularly effective work, so that if you give to one of our recommended charities, either through us or directly to them, you can be confident basically that your money is being used as well as possible. The charities I've spoken about today are all charities that are recommended by us. We don't keep any of the donations that we receive. We exist purely to try and raise more money for these organizations. In the past year, thanks largely to a podcast that Lewis Bollard did, we've raised over $2.5 million for these charities. The other, as I said earlier, the other kind of really key piece here is talent. I would recommend this organization if you're interested. Dustin spoke about them before as well, Animal Advocacy Careers. They do training for people who are interested in moving into the space. They also have a jobs board where you can find jobs that are currently open and available and people need. And they have a really amazing program for getting people into working in the EU Parliament, which you have to be an EU citizen to join their program, but if that is you, I'm jealous, firstly, but also I would recommend checking that out. And finally, this one is something we can all do. It costs very little. This QR code will take you to a page for a EU policy consultation that's currently out. Anybody who don't have to be an EU citizen can follow this in. This QR code takes you to information on how to do that. But this is a really good opportunity to signal that you care about this issue, to help lend your voice to kind of feeding into the EU's policy over the next few years on what they'll do around farmed animals. So this is a really simple thing that all of us can do. It'll take you about 20 minutes maybe to fill this out. You have until December the 12th to do so. That's a direct way we can all have an impact today, which is always good. But yeah, that's my talk. Thank you.
So the first question is, do egg-laying hens that are cage-free have a net good life, or are there more improvements that are needed?
So it was about whether an egg-laying hen that's not in a cage has a net positive life.
It's still in a barn, maybe it's out of a cage.
I think probably no, for most of them, right? Most in the UK, free range is relatively common. Whereas in the US, for example, even if you're likely to be barn raised, eggs are one of the few products where there is a mandated welfare labeling scheme. So if you look at your egg, you can see it's actually printed on the egg whether they are organic, cage-free, organic, free-range, barn raised, or in a cage. Or whether there isn't sufficient information to know. So you can look for organic eggs, for example, which will have the highest standards. But what we're doing here is we're trying to reduce the amount of suffering that is caused to these animals. We're not at the stage yet where we're giving them good lives.
Nice. So you've got these stickers around the conference. I don't know if anyone's seen them. $1 brings 9 years cage-free to a hen. $1 helps 1,500 shrimp, right? How do you compare years of help for one bird to maybe 30 minutes of help to thousands of shrimp? Seems like a very hard comparison. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it is really hard. So I tend to because I think it's extremely difficult to know, I tend to try to say, like, okay, all suffering is, I think it's sort of simpler and probably the correct that all suffering is, roughly speaking, equally valid. So certainly for animals. So I wouldn't put any more value on the suffering of on the same amount of suffering of a chicken as I would on a suffering of, say, a shrimp or an insect. And so this makes it a little bit, conceptually at least, a little bit easier, because we can say, okay, like, there are people working, for example, Rethink Priorities and charitable entrepreneurship, who've worked on trying to quantify the suffering of animals. So charitable entrepreneurship has a thing called Suffering Adjusted Days, SADS, which is an attempt to put some numbers to, like, okay, how much are we making the lives of these animals better with these different interventions? And while I think those there are a lot of assumptions built into those, at least that's like a way of us to kind of start grappling with this problem and say, okay, one SAD is equally relevant as another to me, and therefore I'll just kind of try and look at the interventions that are going to reduce suffering as much as I can, taking a massive grain of salt, because these numbers are all built on a lot of like assumptions and a lot of like, there's just not enough research yet for us to be like really confident about the numbers, but it's at least like a way to start making some steps forward.
What's the Pepsi connection to animal cruelty?
I don't know. So, I mean, PepsiCo is a massive company. They're a food company. They do a lot of stuff. I assume that they have eggs somewhere in their supply chain, but specifically which products, I couldn't tell you, I'm afraid.
Do you have an idea of the, this is a question I asked, because I personally donate to the Humane League. What's the marginal expected impact for every dollar to effective cage-free facilities? Historically, it was 9+ years that we've seen for every dollar. 9 years of a egg-laying hen moved from cages to cage-free. OpenPhil estimated last year that because we've done all the effective campaigns, maybe we're down to about 2 years for every additional dollar. But do you have thoughts on that debate?
So I think it is probably, certainly in places like Europe and America, we're getting to the point where it probably is less effective than it used to be. Although more recent estimates are often like upgrading the effectiveness. So it's more effective than we thought it used to be, but like over time will become less impactful. But I still think, I mean, if you think about the world in general, there are still many parts of the world where we are not. There's a lot more work to do on cage-free. So particularly Asia. Where we are, the number of cages is growing. There are now organizations working in places like particularly East Asia, Southeast Asia, on this problem. And I think, so Synergia is one of the charities we recommend. They do cage-free. They also do work for pigs in places like South America and East Asia. I think this is really important because these are some of the areas where factory farming is growing fastest, where there are the fewest protections, and we can still make a lot of progress on these things, particularly as people in these countries become, the middle class expands, like a lot of the same levers start to look plausible. So I think there's still a huge way to go if we look globally on cage-free, and so I'm still like pretty bullish on this intervention, even if maybe like you might want to switch from like say THL to Synergia or something like this.
Yeah. What sort of jobs are there in this industry? Is it just lobbying and networking?
Yeah, so there's lots of different skill sets. So I think some skill sets that are really helpful are things like campaigning and fundraising. So if you like talking to people, if you like organizing things, if you like marketing, these are all really useful skills in like a lot of different ways, because it can be running like people to go out and like get people together and like community organize around running a protest, for example, or these sorts of things. Those are really helpful. If you prefer being behind a desk, I think that there are lots of fruitful research areas. If you have a corporate background, better operational running of these organizations, better leadership, better structure, company structures, non-profit structures. These are all really important gaps in the skills. Our movement is, relatively speaking, a lot of really committed amateurs and doesn't have huge amounts of people with a lot of kind of understanding of how to build an effective organization that can grow and scale. And so if you're coming from sort of a management consultancy background, for example, or something like this, I think there are some really important skills that you have that could be very valuable to the movement as well.
I'd love to hear if there are any other questions in the room that people have. Yeah?
Hi, we loved this talk, as all the other animal ones. I would love to hear your thoughts on the economic impact of this. I don't know if you've heard an argument that veganism or vegetarian lifestyle is a rich man's diet. You know, of kind of the reason why McDonald's is appetizing. It's not because it looks appetizing. It's because it's financially appetizing, convenient. What is your take on that? I have another question, but please, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. So there are like a couple of components to this. So firstly, technically speaking, vegan and vegetarian diets are cheaper, but that doesn't account for like the costs of preparing food. So if you're not only financially poor but time poor, as obviously many people are, that I think that's like less of a valid argument. Although in the US particularly, the more, roughly speaking, the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be vegan. So I don't know what that says, but that is nevertheless the case. Some of the campaigns like Cage-Free, for example, they change the cost of products by like something like a penny, like really tiny changes in costs. But that's why I think, but the broader point is why I think that like we need to think beyond just like diet change and think about, okay, what can different people do? So one of the great things about donating versus changing your diet is you can only change your diet once. So you can only stop eating the animal products you were going to eat anyway, but you could donate, like, depending on your resources, you could donate more and more and more and more, right? So you can have, if there are people out there who are in a situation where they can't really have an impact because they just don't have the options, you can kind of, or if you like, you can have an impact on their behalf as well. And so it's one of these kind of things that we can scale as much as we feel able to. So I think kind of allows us to sort of sidestep, if you like, some of these questions that I think are valid questions.
I think your answer was pretty brilliant. I think my challenge then in the idea of, well, statistically that veganism or vegetarian is cheaper, where probably one would, the individuals promoting this kind of is cheaper. The way they do is in their island, the kitchen, their cutleries, and their. I don't know if maybe the way this lifestyle is being promoted is beneficial and actually having the impact or the education necessary for, let's say, cultures that actually have festivals designated to actually promoting an anti-lifestyle of that nature. What's your thoughts on kind of how to implement it?
Yeah, so part of the reason that I started with the vegan thing, and as an organization Farm Kind, we sort of explicitly tell people, like, you don't need to go vegan.
Yeah.
We have a calculator which people can use to, like, you can put in the...
Can we try it right now?
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah.
So I will show you. We have this thing where you can put in your diet, and you can see, this is our website. We try and make the most of the cute animals. So this is our compassion calculator you can find on our website. What you can do is you can put in your diet. So this is the average person. You can use these sliders to change. So maybe you eat like a lot of pork, but you don't eat any fish, for example. And
is it possible we could? Is there any person who's willing to demonstrate what they have in a week? Yeah.
Sure. I eat fish maybe once or twice a week.
Okay.
And no other. I do eat eggs maybe once a week, and that's it.
Once. So eggs, we'll say one. Oh, that's shrimp. Sorry, not paying enough attention to what I'm doing. Okay. So yours is pretty. Fish are quite expensive to offset, but otherwise your thing is going to be fairly cheap, which is good. Let me just use the sliders to see it right now because it's going to be quicker. Okay. So if you were to donate $11, excuse me, through us, you would be able to effectively remove as much suffering as your diet is plausibly causing. And so this is like. The whole point of this really is both to make it explicit that you don't have to change your diet and like actually like what the impact of diet change is, but because when we started this organization, what we thought, and I think this speaks to your point, is that veganism and this idea of veganism has like a real strategic problem in that it has a lot of associations with it that are cultural, that are political sometimes, that just probably mean that what we want to do is separate out the idea of veganism and the idea of caring about factory farmed animals and wanting to see the end of factory farming, because they don't have to go together. They can, I'm a vegan, they go together for me, but they don't have to go together. And so what we really wanted to do was say, like, you can care about this issue, you can do something about this issue without having to also buy into this other thing, which is around your lifestyle. Yeah?
Thank you so much for the presentation. It's very insightful. I would love to hear more about your transition from lawyer to animal activist.
Yeah, so basically, this came out because I did the charity entrepreneurship program. So I was, when I became a lawyer, I worked actually in the Department for Agriculture in the UK, DEFRA, for a bit, and I really enjoyed that. I felt that I really loved being a lawyer in government. Like, there were relatively limited opportunities for me to like work on the things that I cared about and that I felt I could make a difference. But this program basically it makes it easy to start an organization. So it helps you with finding like a co-founder, finding an idea, something that's worth working on, an early introduction to funders. As well as, because it's quite a prestigious program now, like it kind of gives you, for many people, a seal of like, okay, these people are like, you know, they're likely to be worth like my time, sort of thing. And so this was like an opportunity for us to kind of like start a thing and like try and like solve a problem. Because as I say, I think one of the key problems in the animal space is funding. It's like one of the biggest bottlenecks. So this is our attempt to kind of solve that. And it sometimes occasionally uses my legal skills, but not really.
What was the name of the program again?
Charity entrepreneurship. That's still the name of the program. The organization is now called Ambitious Impact, which is a bit easier to spell.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great presentation, thank you. This is London, and there's a chicken shop on every single corner. And I've never been in one because I'm vegetarian, but I'm pretty sure that chicken is not going to be organic. And the people that buy there are generally looking for something that's just like cheap, some flavour, a bit greasy, like something quick. And and often, even though they might be chains, they're not like a chain like McDonald's that might have that kind of social stigma from like people thinking, oh, they use caged hens. Do you have any thoughts on how you sort of, work in that market where neither the consumers nor the sellers actually want anything that's more expensive?
Yeah, so on the broader point of like smaller retailers, often there are middlemen involved, and so catering companies and things, and lots of these campaigns also focus on catering companies. Historically, I think catering companies have been a little bit harder to influence, but like still possible and still achievable. And so you can influence like the people upstream in the supply chain from like the individual chicken shop. On like meat chicken specifically, there is a campaign called the Better Chicken Commitment, which is doing a very similar thing to the cage-free thing, but with chickens used for meat, because they're different chickens. It focuses on things like how much space do they have, also the breed of chicken. So we use typically these things often called Franken chickens or fast-growing breeds, where basically the chicken has been selectively bred so that it grows as fast as possible in order for them to be able to be killed and eaten as fast as possible. Unfortunately, basically, for many of these animals, their bone structures and their organs don't grow in line with their amount of like meat, and so you have these horrible images of birds that like can't stand up and are just lying on the floor in the barn, like getting ammonia burns because of the stuff on the floor and things like this. And so trying to kind of get companies to move away from that could be a massive difference for chickens. But this has been harder because that does increase the price of these products by way more than cage-free. And so one of the things I think, another reason that we need a lot of money in this space is we have a few interventions that work, and then lots of like potentially really exciting things. And what we need is the ability to both scale up the things like cage-free that are working, but also find ways to solve some of these other problems, because they're really hard problems, and we won't just be able to use corporate campaigns to solve every single one of these challenges. We're going to need lots of different approaches, lots of different tactics in order to solve some of these challenges, which are just a little bit harder. At the moment, we're kind of picking the low-hanging fruit, and that will get harder over time.
Yeah, we have one more. Yeah, one more. Go ahead. If anyone has to ask a question and would like to.
I can just
All right.
Quite keen. So, Do you know the notion of kind of like in the Stone Ages where you like respect the animal by using the whole animal, this idea of waste, and how to like kill and treat and eat animals? And what do you think of the discipline to develop and transform the attitudes towards factory farming with that notion? And are there any charities that you support which focus on this practice and have evidence of its effectiveness?
So, I mean, the thing is, like, actually in the farming system, they like, relatively speaking, most of the animal is used because you have these byproducts. They're not all fed to humans, but you might put some of it in pet food or use it for all these different products, right? But really, I think the core issue here is like how much suffering is the animal sustaining in order to be, in order to get to the point. I think there are there absolutely are cultural changes that we need, but I think they are around things like getting people to, I think basically getting people to feeling that they can identify with what is, for most people, their natural care and compassion for animals. So about 75% of people in surveys say that they're opposed factory farming, they don't like it. I think the reason that almost nobody does anything about that is partly because they think the costs to them are going to be really high. They think they're going to have to stop eating all these animal products. They don't realize, well, they just don't realize there's anything they can do. And I think what we're trying to do is really to say to people, you already care about animals, you already feel compassionate. If you saw this, you would be upset, we know that. And we're just trying to give you we're trying to invite you in to be part of the solution by making that easy for you, by making it clear that you can make a difference. And I think that approach ultimately is how we can try and start putting together like a wider coalition of people to bring about the kind of social change we need.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thom, how can we be supporting FarmKind professionally or you personally? How can we support you?
So I think the easiest way to support us is to tell people you know about our work, like Compassion Calculator. If you know some people who are like, yeah, I really care about the animals, but I just could never go vegan, like this is a tool that they could use. The page has this little video on the top, which is like a 1-minute explainer of like how it works. You can send to people. That's a really easy way to do it. For the non-vegetarians or vegans, they can simply check out our charity recommendations, donate through us, donate directly through those charities. Both things are great things to do. So yeah, I would say those are the easiest ways.
Awesome. I'd love to close it in prayer.
Yeah.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the work that Thom is doing to be a good steward of your creation. I just pray blessing over his work. I pray blessing over all the animals that you love. We know that you've come to redeem the whole world and all flesh. You've come to redeem every part of creation and to redeem all suffering and all pain. We thank you that the work that we can be a part of. Lord, I pray for just passion and energy to do that work well, that we would see this as a joyful call as Christians, that we can be a part of this and not look at the suffering and be overwhelmed, but look at the suffering and see you in it and see the way that you can work through us to redeem it. And I just pray finally for a blessing for Thom. On rough days, give him hope, give him strength, give him courage. If he's ever feeling discouraged or overwhelmed, just remind him that you've overcome all, and that with your help, he can do anything. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Thom.